The moment she stepped through the automatic doors of McDonald's, the fluorescent lights above the counter seemed almost indifferent to her presence. She was new to town, a fact that had not escaped the notice of the 5 boys sitting near the corner booth, their eyes sharp and calculating. The hum of conversations, the distant sizzle of fries in the kitchen, and the low buzz of the soda machines formed a soundtrack that should have been comforting, ordinary, even mundane. But for her, every small sound carried a weight that made her pulse quicken, each movement around her a reminder of the uncertainty that had followed her since the first day she transferred to this small town. Her name was Emily, and despite her quiet demeanor, she carried herself with a dignity that hinted at resilience. She wasn't naive, life had taught her to be wary, but there was a cautious optimism in her steps, a belief that perhaps this place could be different, kinder than the schools she had left behind. Her parents had insisted on starting fresh here, away from the shadows of previous mistakes and misunderstandings. This McDonald's trip was supposed to be a small, ordinary act of normalcy. She had wanted nothing more than a cheeseburger and a brief moment of anonymity. But anonymity was a luxury she would not be afforded. The 5 boys noticed her instantly. They had been there long enough to mark the entrance of anyone who seemed new, anyone who dared to occupy the space without their implicit approval. Their leader, a tall boy with a crooked smirk and a presence that seemed to draw the others into his orbit, nudged his companions with a knowing glance. "There's the new girl," he said, loud enough for the smallest, most alert ears around the restaurant to catch. Emily felt it immediately, the shift in the air, subtle at first, like the way the atmosphere changes just before a storm breaks. She tried to ignore them, focusing on the menu, on the small hope that maybe if she acted ordinary, invisible, they might pass her by. But the boys were relentless. Each of them rose in turn, almost ceremoniously, surrounding her with a kind of threatening precision that seemed rehearsed, their laughter low and deliberate. "You're new, right?" The tallest one sneered, leaning a little too close, his face contorted in mockery. Emily's stomach tightened, and for a fleeting second, she considered retreating to the safety of the parking lot. But she stayed, rooted by an instinct she didn't fully understand, a need to assert that she belonged even in the face of hostility. One of the boys knocked over her drink intentionally, sending a cold soda splashing across her shoes and the table. The other 4 erupted in laughter, the sound cruel and consuming, filling the space around them and drowning out the clatter of trays and the casual chatter of other patrons. Emily's face flushed with humiliation, yet there was a calm undercurrent to her reaction. She bent down to pick up the cup, her hands trembling, but her eyes never left theirs. In that glance, they could see a defiance that was quiet but unmistakable. Then it happened. Without warning, the tallest boy shoved her forcefully, knocking her into a table of unsuspecting customers. Her tray clattered to the floor, fries spilling like golden rain. The room seemed to tilt around her, and for a heartbeat, time itself paused. The 5 boys circled her, each movement deliberate, each smirk etched with malice. "Think you belong here?" another taunted. "Think anyone's gonna let you?" Emily's instinct screamed at her to run, to flee from the humiliation and the pain that was already beginning to sting along her side where she had hit the table. But another part of her, the part that had survived countless small cruelties and whispered prejudices, whispered back, "Stand. Don't give them the satisfaction." It was then that something remarkable began to happen. At a few tables over, teenagers who had been quietly eating, watching, assessing, began to shift uncomfortably. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Is this happening? 5 boys attacking a girl? In McDonald's?" The murmurs drew attention from older patrons, some of whom were parents, others employees who had initially assumed it was a schoolyard quarrel. One of the teenage girls whispered to her friend, "We have to do something." And suddenly, the paralysis that fear often brings began to crack. Emily, sensing the change in the room's energy, straightened her back. Her shoulders squared. She looked around, noticing not just the hostility, but the potential for solidarity. It was a fleeting, fragile moment, yet it was enough. Enough to remind her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. But the boys were oblivious to this shift. Their arrogance blinded them, their sense of invulnerability inherited from a long line of unchecked behaviors in the very halls of the high school that had nurtured their mischief. They pressed closer, and for a moment, the tension became almost unbearable, as if the air itself had thickened with impending violence. Then came a voice, sharp and commanding, cutting through the murmur and the laughter. "Hey, back off!" It was one of the older teenagers, a boy who had always been a quiet observer, rarely speaking up, but who seemed, in that instant, to have found a reservoir of authority within himself. The 5 boys froze momentarily, turning their attention toward him. The McDonald's staff, emboldened by the sudden attention, stepped forward as well. "You don't get to do this," the boy said firmly. "Not here. Not anywhere." For a second, it seemed like the confrontation might diffuse, that reason, or at least social consequence, might prevail. But then the leader of the 5 scoffed, a harsh sound that was more bark than laugh, and took another step toward Emily. His fists tightening, Emily's heart pounded, her mind racing through scenarios and potential outcomes, each one darker than the last. And then, as if propelled by some invisible hand, a small crowd began to form. Other teenagers, initially hesitant, now joined, surrounding the group with an unspoken message. "This ends now." The boys, confronted not with authority but with collective moral pressure, hesitated. It was a pause pregnant with possibility, a moment suspended between chaos and order. Emily, seizing the opening, stepped back slowly, her eyes never leaving the tallest boys. She did not retreat in fear. She stepped back in measured determination, signaling that she would not crumble, that she was neither a victim nor invisible. What happened next would become the talk of the school for weeks to come. A witness had pulled out a phone, capturing the moment when the 5 boys, for the first time, encountered the full weight of public scrutiny. The clip was short, raw, unedited, yet it encapsulated the gravity of the situation. A new girl, attacked without provocation, standing with a courage that stunned her aggressors, surrounded by peers who refused to look away. And that clip, Emily's defiance became a mirror, reflecting the moral compass of an entire student body. The laughter of the 5 boys faded, replaced by a nervous energy as they realized that the room was no longer theirs, that they were being watched not only by peers but by the larger social fabric of the community. The school, when news of the incident reached its halls, reacted with a mixture of shock, indignation, and an awakening sense of justice. Teachers convened, parents debated, and students who had long been passive observers of bullying began to speak up. The clip circulated widely, igniting conversations about accountability, courage, and the way communities respond when faced with cruelty. Emily, at the center of it all, became both symbol and catalyst, not because she sought attention or sympathy, but because her presence and her refusal to be diminished demanded a reckoning. Her dignity, unshaken in the face of aggression, forced a school and a community to confront its own values, to ask themselves what kind of people they wanted to be. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The story ceased to be about the attack itself and became about the ripple effect of courage, the transformative power of standing up, and the undeniable truth that even the smallest acts of bravery can illuminate the darkness that often hides in the most ordinary places. By the time Emily left McDonald's that day, the immediate danger had passed, but the impact was only beginning. The ripple she had unknowingly initiated would spread far beyond the walls of that fast food restaurant, reshaping perceptions, challenging entrenched hierarchies, and demanding that dignity be recognized as a right, not a privilege. It was the beginning of a narrative that would change not only Emily's life but the culture of the school itself, forcing a reckoning that had been long overdue. And it all started with a simple act of courage, refusing to be intimidated, refusing to be silenced, refusing to be erased. The next morning, the school hallways buzzed with a peculiar energy, one that combined curiosity, unease, and a faint glimmer of hope. The clip from McDonald's had gone viral within the walls of the high school, circulating through group chats and whispered conversations in lockers. Students who had never spoken to Emily before now found themselves confronted not with the distance of indifference, but with the raw, undeniable presence of courage. Her name was everywhere, murmured in classrooms, repeated in the cafeteria, even scrawled on bathroom walls. not as a taunt, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the force of her character. Emily walked through the hallways with the same careful dignity she had displayed at McDonald's, her eyes scanning the crowd, her posture a subtle declaration that she would not be broken. She had learned early in life that appearances could deceive, that sometimes the strongest statements were made in silence. The whispers followed her, but they were no longer mocking. They carried a different tone, one tinged with admiration, disbelief, and in some cases, shame for the part bystanders had played in a culture that tolerated cruelty. The 5 boys, the instigators of the attack, were now walking through a gauntlet of glances that ranged from accusatory to openly hostile. Their arrogance had dissipated like smoke in the wind, replaced by a growing awareness that their actions had consequences far beyond what they had imagined. The tallest of the group, the ringleader, avoided eye contact, his smirk gone, replaced by a tension that seemed to tighten with each passing second. The weight of scrutiny bore down on them relentlessly, the invisible yet omnipresent judgment of the school community pressing them to confront the enormity of what they had done. Teachers convened quickly after the clip surfaced, their offices filling with a mixture of disbelief and moral urgency. School administrators, long accustomed to handling incidents quietly behind closed doors, realized that the public nature of the attack made silence impossible. Policies were reviewed, statements were drafted, and meetings were scheduled with parents. The incident was no longer a simple case of playground aggression. It was a mirror reflecting the values, or lack thereof, that had been silently tolerated within the student body for far too long. Emily, despite the swirling attention around her, remained focused on her own sense of integrity. She did not seek revenge, nor did she relish the discomfort now facing her aggressors. Her goal was neither spectacle nor vindication. It was simply justice, fairness, and the reaffirmation of a truth that too often went unspoken: that every person deserved to be treated with respect, and that courage was both an act and a legacy. Her parents noticed the shift almost immediately. They had feared the social isolation that often comes with being new, especially in a tight-knit community where hierarchies had long been established. Instead, they observed a remarkable transformation, not in Emily, but in the broader environment around her. Teachers approached her with encouragement, offering guidance and support, while students who had previously remained on the sidelines now found themselves emboldened by her example. Courage, it seemed, was contagious. The 5 boys, facing a combination of administrative action and social scrutiny, began to fracture under pressure. Privately, tensions flared among them, the unity that had given them confidence dissolving in the face of widespread condemnation. The ringleader, once brash and untouchable, found himself the subject of whispered commentary not only from peers but from younger students who had previously regarded him with awe or fear. For the first time, he confronted the consequences of his actions, and in that confrontation, a seed of reflection took root. However begrudgingly parents of other students, too, began to weigh in. Conversations at kitchen tables and in carpool lines shifted from casual gossip to serious discussions about accountability, empathy, and community responsibility. Emily's experience catalyzed a broader dialogue about how children learned values, how aggression was normalized in subtle ways, and how communities could intervene constructively before cruelty escalated. The McDonald's incident, while shocking, became a lens through which the town examined its own culture, revealing uncomfortable truths about silence, complicity, and the social mechanisms that had allowed such behavior to thrive at a T-school. The administration took swift action. The boys were suspended pending further investigation, and the incident prompted mandatory workshops on bullying, conflict resolution, and emotional intelligence. Teachers implemented new classroom practices designed to foster inclusion, respect, and accountability. Peer mentoring programs were expanded, and counselors were made available for students affected by the incident. Emily herself participated, not out of obligation, but as an active agent of change, offering insight into the emotional and psychological impact of aggression and marginalization. In the midst of this upheaval, Emily's own social landscape began to shift. Friends who had observed from a distance now approached her openly, seeking connection, reassurance, or simply the courage to express themselves authentically. She navigated these interactions with care, balancing the newfound attention with the quiet strength that had defined her from the start. She learned, even in small ways, the profound influence that one individual could have in reshaping the moral compass of an entire community. The 5 boys, meanwhile, faced consequences both formal and informal. Social isolation accompanied the administrative measures, their previous sense of entitlement replaced by a complex mix of fear, anger, and emerging understanding. Some attempted apologies, awkward and half-hearted, while others remained defiant, unable or unwilling to confront their own roles in the incident. Through it all, Emily maintained a consistent posture of dignity. She did not seek to humiliate them, but neither did she minimize the harm they had caused. Her response exemplified the balance between justice and mercy, showing that strength need not be cruel to be effective as the weeks progressed. The story of McDonald's became a touchstone within the school, a narrative that teachers referenced in discussions about ethics, empathy, and personal responsibility. Students debated, wrote essays, and engaged in projects that explored the social dynamics revealed by the incident. The conversation extended beyond the immediate actors to encompass the broader community, encouraging reflection on the structures and norms that had allowed bullying and intimidation to go unchallenged. Emily's role in these discussions was both subtle and profound. She did not dominate the conversation, nor did she seek the spotlight. Her presence alone, however, became a guiding force. Her resilience, quiet dignity, and refusal to be silenced offered a living example of courage in action, demonstrating that change could emerge not through aggression or spectacle, but through steadfast adherence to one's values and principles. The ripple effect extended even further. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it not merely as an isolated incident of bullying, but as a case study in community response, youth agency, and the power of collective moral action. Parents, educators, and civic leaders began to engage in broader discussions about safety, accountability, and the importance of cultivating environments in which children could grow without fear of humiliation or violence. Emily, despite the attention, remained focused on what truly mattered, the possibility of lasting change. She understood that real transformation required more than viral clips or disciplinary measures. It demanded sustained commitment from every layer of the community, from students to educators to parents. Her own experience became a catalyst, sparking initiatives that promoted empathy, respect, and understanding, reshaping not just behavior but attitudes, values, and the cultural fabric of her school. By the end of the term, the landscape of the school had shifted in subtle but meaningful ways. Hallways once rife with whispered cruelty now carried an undercurrent of accountability and awareness. Students were more attentive to the impact of their words and actions, teachers more proactive in addressing conflicts, and parents more engaged in guiding the moral development of their children. Emily's courage had become a lens through which the entire community re-examined itself, demonstrating the profound influence one person could exert, not through dominance or fear, but through integrity and resilience. Yet, even amid this progress, challenges remained. The boys, now grappling with the consequences of their behavior, had moments of reflection punctuated by stubborn resistance. Social dynamics continued to evolve unpredictably, requiring ongoing attention from educators and parents. Emily herself had to navigate the complex emotional terrain of being both central to change and constantly under scrutiny, balancing her own sense of self with the expectations imposed upon her by peers, adults, and the broader community. In those moments, she discovered the deeper dimensions of courage. It was not merely about standing up in the face of immediate threat. It was about enduring, adapting, and continuing to act with integrity even when the spotlight shifted and the initial crisis had passed. Courage, she learned, was a long-term endeavor, a daily commitment to uphold one's values and to influence others not through coercion but through example. By the time summer approached, the McDonald's incident had become more than a single event. It had become a catalyst for reflection, dialogue, and growth. Students, teachers, and parents had begun to internalize lessons about empathy, responsibility, and community engagement. The 5 boys, facing the consequences of their actions, were slowly confronting the moral realities of their behavior, while Emily, steadfast in her integrity, continued to exemplify the quiet power of principled action. The story of that day, of courage, confrontation, and eventual transformation, resonated far beyond the walls of the school. It became a touchstone for discussions about justice, dignity, and the responsibilities we all bear to one another. And at the heart of it was a simple, undeniable truth. Even in the most ordinary settings, when faced with cruelty, the choices of one person can illuminate the path toward fairness, compassion, and collective accountability. The weeks that followed the McDonald's incident became a crucible not only for Emily but for the entire community. What had begun as a singular moment of aggression had evolved into a complex tapestry of accountability, reflection, and transformation. The school, once complacent in the shadows of its own culture, now found itself under a moral microscope, forced to confront long-ignored patterns of behavior and to grapple with the delicate balance between punishment and growth. Emily carried herself through the hallways with a quiet strength that seemed to radiate even when she was alone. The attention she received, sometimes whispered, sometimes openly declared, was both a burden and a confirmation of her resilience. She had never sought recognition, yet recognition had found her, not for what she had endured, but for how she had responded. She walked with the awareness that her courage had ignited a dialogue far larger than herself, a dialogue that reached teachers, administrators, parents, and peers alike. The 5 boys, for their part, faced a series of consequences designed to reflect both justice and the possibility of rehabilitation. Suspensions were extended, mandatory counseling sessions were required, and restorative justice meetings were scheduled with the students they had harmed. These sessions were tense, fraught with awkward silence and occasional bursts of defensiveness, but they offered a glimpse of the difficult, often painful process by which accountability is internalized. During one such session, Emily sat across from the ringleader, her presence calm but unyielding. He avoided her gaze, shuffling papers nervously, his posture betraying an unease he could not disguise. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of a clock, each second amplifying the tension between them. "Do you understand why this matters?" Emily asked, her voice steady but not cold. He hesitated. The words caught somewhere between pride and realization. I didn't think it was that serious," he muttered. Emily's eyes softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. "Intent doesn't erase impact. What you did mattered because it hurt someone else. It doesn't stop there. It affects everyone around you. You have to take responsibility, not just for what happened, but for how you move forward." The session ended without a dramatic confession or immediate reconciliation, but the seed of reflection had been planted. The ringleader left the room with his steps slower, more deliberate, as if carrying the weight of a lesson that had yet to fully settle. Change, Emily understood, was rarely instantaneous. It was a process, one measured in incremental awakenings rather than sudden epiphanies. Meanwhile, the broader school community began to grapple with its own response. Teachers held debriefing sessions with students who had witnessed the incident, encouraging them to reflect not only on the events themselves but on the social dynamics that had allowed aggression to flourish unchecked. Students shared their fears, their complicity, and their newfound understanding that silence in the face of wrongdoing is, in itself, a form of participation. Parents, too, were forced to confront uncomfortable truths. Many admitted privately that they had underestimated the social pressures their children faced, or that they had dismissed minor incidents of bullying as rites of passage. The McDonald's attack had shattered complacency, revealing how easily cruelty can be normalized and how essential it is for adults to model integrity and empathy. Community meetings became forums for dialogue, not accusation, where strategies for fostering inclusion and accountability were debated and refined. Emily, despite her central role in these developments, remained grounded. She understood that true courage was not about accolades or recognition. It was about consistent action, about standing firm in one's values even when it was inconvenient, uncomfortable, or lonely. She began volunteering with the school's peer mentoring program, speaking with younger students about conflict resolution, resilience, and the importance of empathy. Her voice, calm but persuasive, carried a weight born not of authority, but of lived experience and moral clarity. The impact extended beyond school walls. Local community leaders recognized the significance of the incident and organized workshops on youth behavior, ethics, and community responsibility. Parents from neighboring schools reached out to learn how the school had handled the situation, and educators from other districts sought guidance on implementing similar restorative practices. What had begun as a moment of cruelty in a McDonald's restaurant had, remarkably, become a catalyst for broader societal reflection. Yet, for all the progress, the emotional fallout was not negligible. Emily carried the memory of that attack with her, a constant reminder of both vulnerability and strength. Nights were sometimes restless, replaying the events in detail, questioning how things might have gone differently. Counseling sessions provided space for processing, for understanding that trauma does not diminish courage, and that acknowledging pain is part of the path to empowerment. The boys, too, faced internal struggles. Some wrestled with guilt, others with the shame of social ostracism. The ringleader's mother, attending one of the restorative meetings, spoke privately with Emily's mother. Her voice trembled as she admitted, "I never imagined he could hurt someone like this. I thought he was just being a kid." Emily's mother nodded, understanding the nuance. Culpability and innocence often coexist in troubling ways, and the path to accountability is rarely straightforward. Amid these complexities, a remarkable transformation occurred within the student body. Students began forming support networks, both formal and informal, to address bullying proactively. Peer-led initiatives flourished, focusing on empathy, conflict resolution, and inclusion. Social norms shifted, slowly but perceptibly, as acts of kindness and intervention became recognized and celebrated, while aggression and intimidation faced increasing social disapproval. The cultural landscape of the school was being reshaped from within, with Emily's example serving as both a catalyst and a compass. Emily herself became acutely aware of the broader implications of her experience. Courage, she realized, was not a solitary act. It was part of a continuum, a conversation between individual action and communal response. Her decision to stand firm at McDonald's had sparked reflection, dialogue, and change, not just in her immediate circle, but in the wider community. She began to see the moral architecture of her environment, the invisible threads connecting behavior, expectation, and consequence, and she navigated it with care, intention, and integrity. As the school year progressed, the 5 boys faced ongoing challenges. Rebuilding trust was slow, painful work, marked by missteps and moments of insight. Some of their classmates extended cautious gestures of reconciliation. Others remained wary, insisting that actions, not words, would determine the trajectory of their reintegration. The tension between accountability and forgiveness became a recurring theme in school discussions, one that educators and students explored with honesty and nuance. Emily observed these developments with a mixture of empathy and resolve. She understood the complexity of human behavior, the capacity for both harm and growth, and the importance of fostering environments where reflection could lead to meaningful transformation. Her own growth was intertwined with these broader dynamics. Her courage had not only protected her, but had illuminated pathways for others to confront their own choices and responsibilities. By the end of the semester, the school had undergone a subtle but profound shift. The incident at McDonald's was no longer merely a story of aggression. It had become a narrative of resilience, reflection, and moral awakening. Students were more willing to intervene in conflicts, teachers were more proactive in fostering inclusive spaces, and the culture of silence that had long protected bullies was slowly eroding. Emily's role, while central, was never about dominance. It was about exemplifying integrity and inspiring others to act with courage in their own lives. And yet, even as progress was celebrated, Emily and her family remained vigilant. They knew that cultural change is never linear, that setbacks are inevitable, and that the principles of dignity, respect, and accountability require constant reinforcement. They also understood that the true measure of courage is not in the dramatic confrontation but in the consistent, ongoing commitment to uphold one's values, even when attention fades and challenges persist. The McDonald's incident, once a singular moment of fear and aggression, had become a touchstone for the entire community. It illuminated the interplay between individual action and collective responsibility, showing how courage in the face of cruelty can ripple outward, influencing behaviors, attitudes, and social norms. Emily's steadfastness demonstrated that dignity is not simply a right to be asserted in private, It is a principle to be defended publicly, with conviction, resilience, and moral clarity. As the year drew to a close, Emily reflected on the journey. She had been thrust into circumstances that tested her courage, her integrity, and her understanding of human behavior. She had witnessed cruelty and witnessed accountability, despair and hope, failure and transformation. Through it all, she had learned that true strength is measured not by the absence of fear but by the ability to act ethically and purposefully despite it. And in that realization lay the profound lesson that would guide her, and her community, into the future. Courage is not an isolated act. It is a commitment, a dialogue, a ripple that extends far beyond the individual. Emily had stood up that day at McDonald's not for fame or recognition, but because it was right. In doing so, she had sparked a movement, however subtle, that reshaped her school, her peers, and even herself, leaving a legacy that would endure far beyond the fleeting moments of fear and confrontation. As the following school year began, the echoes of the McDonald's incident were still felt in hallways, classrooms, and even on the soccer field. But the fear that once accompanied Emily's presence had been replaced by respect, curiosity, and cautious admiration. She had become, without seeking it, a quiet moral compass for her peers, a living example of what it meant to stand firm in the face of adversity. The 5 boys had returned under strict conditions: regular counseling, monitored social interactions, and mandatory participation in peer-led workshops. Their reintegration was neither easy nor immediate. For some students, the memory of the attack remained vivid, a reminder of the potential for cruelty. But even in the most skeptical corners of the school, subtle changes were evident. Whispers of intimidation were now met with hesitation or intervention. Acts of kindness, once overlooked, were acknowledged and celebrated. The school had begun to redefine its own moral boundaries, and Emily's courage had been the catalyst. Emily herself was no longer simply a new girl. She was a figure of resilience, her name associated with integrity and moral fortitude. Teachers consulted her in workshops about student behavior, administrators sought her insight for restorative initiatives, and younger students found in her a role model for navigating conflict with dignity. And yet, she carried this attention with grace, never allowing it to overshadow her quiet sense of self. Her strength was in her consistency, in her refusal to allow the actions of others to dictate her identity. The ringleader of the 5 boys, once brash and untouchable, had undergone a noticeable transformation. Initially resistant, he slowly began to confront the consequences of his behavior, acknowledging not only the physical harm he had caused, but the emotional weight it carried. In a structured restorative meeting, he faced Emily once more, this time with genuine accountability in his eyes. I don't expect forgiveness," he said, voice low. "But I want you to know I understand now. What I did was wrong." Emily's response was measured, calm, and firm. Acknowledgement is a start, but actions moving forward matter more. Make sure this changes who you are, not just how you feel right now. That exchange, though brief, signified a turning point, not just for him, but for the school's culture. It demonstrated that accountability paired with reflection could foster growth, and that courage, when met with genuine contrition, could lead to reconciliation rather than perpetual animosity. Outside of the school, the wider community began to take notice. Local newspapers, inspired by the viral video and the subsequent cultural shift within the school, ran feature stories highlighting the transformative power of empathy and courage. Community centers organized workshops for parents and children, focusing on conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, and the importance of upholding dignity in everyday interactions. Emily's story became more than a school incident. It became a symbol of how individual action could ripple outward, reshaping the moral fabric of a community. Even within the school, formal programs were instituted to ensure the lessons of that day endured. Peer mentoring expanded, with Emily playing a central role in guiding discussions about ethics, bullying, and resilience. Teachers incorporated scenario-based learning into the curriculum, encouraging students to consider the consequences of their actions, the weight of moral courage, and the responsibilities inherent in social interactions. What had begun as a crisis became a blueprint for long-term behavioral and cultural change. For Emily, these developments were affirming but not defining. She had acted out of necessity, driven by a sense of fairness and self-respect. The accolades, the attention, and even the subtle reverence from her peers were secondary to the internal clarity she had discovered that day at McDonald's. Courage, she realized, was not performative. It was lived, quietly, in moments both public and private. Her experience had taught her that integrity requires vigilance, consistency, and the willingness to act even when no one is watching. The five boys continued to navigate the consequences of their actions with varying degrees of sincerity. Some embraced the opportunity for growth, participating fully in counseling and peer-led initiatives. Others remained resistant, struggling with guilt and shame, their transformation uneven but undeniable. The school, under the guidance of administrators and teachers, maintained a delicate balance, holding students accountable while providing space for reflection, learning, and eventual reintegration. By the end of the year, the cultural shift was tangible. Students were more willing to intervene when witnessing aggression, teachers were proactive in creating inclusive environments, and a general ethos of accountability permeated the school's atmosphere. The McDonald's incident, once a singular act of cruelty, had catalyzed a sustained transformation in behavior, expectations, and social norms. Emily's quiet determination had not only protected herself, but had become the foundation for systemic change, proving that individual courage can indeed influence collective conscience. At home, Emily reflected on her journey with her parents. They spoke candidly about fear, pride, and the responsibility of nurturing moral character in a complex world. Emily's mother remarked, "You taught more than those boys, more than the school, more than I ever could. You reminded everyone what it means to stand up, to be just, and to have dignity." Emily understood that her role was ongoing. Courage was not a finite resource. It was cultivated and exercised continually. She had seen the fragility of social norms, the ease with which cruelty could be normalized, and the power of a single act to disrupt injustice. Her experience had instilled in her a lifelong commitment to fairness, empathy, and moral vigilance. The five boys, years later, would look back on that day as a pivotal moment, some with genuine regret, some with lingering defensiveness, but all would recognize the lesson that Emily's courage had imparted. The school, too, would continue to benefit from the cultural shifts initiated by one girl's refusal to be intimidated. Students would remember her example in moments of conflict, in decisions about inclusion and exclusion, and in the choices they made about standing up or standing silent. Emily's story, though centered on a single incident, became emblematic of a larger truth. Dignity, courage, and moral clarity are not privileges reserved for the extraordinary. They are available to anyone willing to claim them, even in ordinary settings. The McDonald's incident, a flashpoint of aggression, ultimately illuminated the capacity for growth, reflection, and systemic change, proving that bravery is not measured solely by confrontation but by consistency, integrity, and the refusal to compromise on fundamental principles. In the quiet aftermath, as Emily walked through the same hallways that had once felt hostile, she felt a sense of peace. Not triumph, not vindication, but the calm confidence that comes from knowing one has acted rightly in the face of fear. She had faced aggression, humiliation, and uncertainty, and had emerged with her values intact, her dignity preserved, and her impact enduring. And perhaps most importantly, the school, the community, and even the five boys had been forced to reckon with the consequences of their choices. They had learned, sometimes painfully, that courage cannot be ignored, that accountability matters, fabric of an entire community. The story of Emily and the five boys at McDonald's was no longer just a tale of cruelty. It was a narrative of hope, resilience, and moral awakening. It illustrated how standing up, even when it feels terrifying, can catalyze profound transformation. It underscored that dignity is not given. It is asserted, defended, and modeled. And above all, it proved that courage, when combined with integrity and empathy, can create ripples that extend far beyond a single moment, touching lives, shaping communities, and inspiring generations to come. As the sun set over the quiet town, casting long shadows across familiar streets, Emily knew one truth with certainty. Courage is not a one-time act. It is a commitment, a habit, and a guiding principle. And in that knowledge lay her greatest power, the ability to face any future challenge with grace, integrity, and unwavering moral clarity. The incident at McDonald's would fade from headlines, but its lessons would endure, etched into the conscience of a school, a community, and a generation of students who had witnessed, firsthand, the transformative impact of standing up for what is right. Emily had not only survived aggression, she had reshaped the world around her, leaving a legacy of courage, justice, and dignity that would be remembered long after the day itself had passed. And in that enduring legacy, the true power of her courage was revealed. It was not about being celebrated. It was about being steadfast, principled, and unwavering in the pursuit of justice, even when no one else seemed to notice.